Hello and welcome back to the Agrabah Desert. Professor Toybox here along with Princess Jasmine, and today I'm going to show you how to build the Thirsty Traveler side quest. First thing we're going to need is a townsperson for our traveler, and I've chosen to use this townsperson here from the Force Awakens playset. I am not even going to try to pronounce that name. But anyway, the clothing here looks kind of like something someone would be wearing in an Arabian setting, so I like that. I'm not going to actually put this person down directly. I'm going to use a friend generator for that. And so to save a little time, I've already put down the creativitoys that I'm going to need. So let's look at those first. I've got a locator here where I want the townsperson to go, and I'm going to put them down with this friend generator and this dynamic locator, or dynamic trigger rather, sorry. For the start of the mission, we'll need a radar marker, another dynamic trigger, and a text generator. And then for the end of the mission, we're going to need a radar marker up here at the oasis, and another dynamic trigger, and an action enforcer, a sound generator, and I've got a level starter. And so all I've done is place those out of the Creativitoys drawer to save a little bit of time. And let's go ahead and start with the friend generator. And so I'm going to select that, and we're going to do a new locator connection. And I'm going to connect that up to my locator over here, like that. And then on the properties for the friend generator, under the behavior, I'm going to set that to sleep, so it'll look like they've collapsed on the desert sands. And we don't need anything under the options here because I'm not going to connect them to a path. Alright, so there's the friend generator. For the dynamic trigger, we're going to connect that to the same locator, and that sets up a radius around this locator. And so when the player enters that radius, then I want to generate this townsperson. So on the dynamic trigger, we'll come down to the properties, and for the trigger distance, I've got this locator set up here, and I've got two large terrain blocks before you get to the oasis. And that's a total of about 24 blocks. And for the dynamic trigger distance, it's 4 units per block, so that puts us at 96. And so I'm going to set the trigger distance on this to be 96. And I don't want to make it any bigger because I don't want this to kick in when you're up at the oasis necessarily. And we got the sand dunes here that's kind of going to hide the generation effect a little bit. So it doesn't have to be too wide. And on the properties, we need to set the target to be the locator, because this toy is going to get moved below the terrain when we're all done. So I want to make sure the trigger distance is not around this toy, but that locator. And then on the dynamic trigger, we'll do a new logic connection when entered by player any. We'll come over to our friend generator, and I'm looking for the Force Awakens category. There we go. And that townsperson is right there. That's the one I want to generate. And then on the friend generator, we'll do a new logic connection when generated. We'll come over to this dynamic trigger and turn it off, because we only want to do this one time. Alright, so that takes care of the friend generation. So when the player gets within 96 units, 24 blocks of this locator, that'll put the friend there, the townsperson who needs to be generated. Now we're going to go ahead and connect up the radar marker next, so we'll connect that to the same locator. And I'm connecting it to the locator versus the friend generator as an actor, because I want this locator, or this radar marker, to be there even if the townsperson isn't. And so we'll come to the properties, The beacon type is a blue exclamation point. I'll leave that because that's a good one for a side quest. Blue again is for side quests. Beacon location is going to be the locator. And I want this on when you come into the toy box. For this dynamic trigger, we're going to connect this one up to that same locator again. And for the properties on this one, target will be the locator. And the trigger distance this time I'm going to set to 4. So you'll have to be pretty close to the townsperson to trigger the side quest. And then for the text displayer on the properties for that, I'm going to set the text duration to 4 and the text style to banner. And so we're not even going to ask the user if they want to help. We're just going to assume the player will. Okay, now for the start of the quest then, the dynamic trigger here, we'll do a new logic connection when entered by player any. First thing I'll do is turn off this radar marker. And we'll do a new logic connection when entered by player any. We'll come over to the text displayer, and I'm going to come down to the missions category. And originally I had it say, I need your help. I think I'm going to change that to be, will you help me? There's nothing to say that I have to leave it exactly as it was before. Now this dynamic trigger needs to do something else as well, so we're going to do a new logic connection when entered by player any. So we've already turned off this radar marker and displayed some text. Now we need to turn on the radar marker up here at the Oasis. And I haven't configured these toys yet, but I can still hook them up. So we're going to activate that radar marker. And we'll do a new logic connection when entered by player any. The last thing this needs to do is turn on the dynamic trigger up here at the Oasis. And I want that dynamic trigger to be off by default, which is why we have a level starter here. So we'll do a new logic connection on the level starter. When catalyzed, we'll come over to the dynamic trigger here at the Oasis and turn that off. All right. This dynamic trigger is going to be connected to the locator up here at the Oasis. And by the way, we're done with the toys down there at the bottom, so that's why we're up here now. And for this dynamic trigger, we'll come to the properties. Once again, the target needs to be the locator. And the trigger distance this time I'm going to set to 6. So 1.5 blocks. So when you get near the water. And this radar marker up here, we'll do a new locator connection, and I'm going to connect that up to the same locator up here. And for the properties on this radar marker, I'm going to change the beacon type to be a blue arrow. Beacon location needs to be the locator. And the rest of the properties are fine. I want this off initially. Okay. So the player picks up the townsperson and brings them up here. And when they get to this locator, the dynamic trigger up here will trigger the end of the quest. So on the dynamic trigger, we'll do a new logic connection when entered. And I'm going to do this by when entered by AI friend. And so this way, when the townsperson enters that area, and I think that's a little bit better because otherwise the player could leave the townsperson down there, and come up here by themselves and enter that trigger area. And the point of the side quest is to bring the townsperson up here. So I want to make sure this end of the quest is triggered when the townsperson enters this area. So when they do, the first thing I'm going to do is come over and deactivate the radar marker. And also on the dynamic trigger, a new logic connection when entered by AI friend. We're going to come over to the action enforcer and have the players celebrate, and we'll make all the players celebrate. And a new logic connection on the dynamic trigger when entered by AI friend. Come over to the sound generator, and we're going to go to the musical category and play Fanfare, which is the little musical flourish that I like to play when a side quest is finished. And then the next thing I want to do is play a little bit of text, so we can reuse the text displayer down there. So a new logic connection when entered by AI friend. We'll come down to the text displayer. And again, I'm going to come down to the missions category. And the townsperson is going to say, I'm in your debt. And I can reuse that text displayer because it's not a query, it's a banner. It's not a question, so that's good. And then we'll also do a new logic connection when entered by AI friend. I want to come over to the friend generator because right now, when I drop that townsperson, they're going to be laying in the water. So I want to come over here and change their behavior. So we're going to come down to generated friend options, and we're going to play looped. And I'm going to come down to the standstill behavior. And so then when we set them down, they'll be actually standing and not laying down in the water. And that should be everything that we need. Now I may have to test this multiple times, so I'm going to come up to my reset button up here near the start of the level. And we need to hook this up to a few things. So the first thing I'm going to do here is we're going to do a new logic connection when pressed. And we're going to come over to the very first dynamic trigger and turn that back on. Because this is what will put the townsperson in there, is that dynamic trigger. That puts them there in the first place. It takes a little while to get back to this button. New logic connection when pressed. The second thing we'll do is take out that townsperson. Because if we complete the quest, they'll be standing up in the oasis. And to reset them, I need to put them back down here. So we'll come back over to the friend generator. And we're going to scroll down to the remove all option. That will take them out of there. And then with this dynamic trigger being regenerated, by the time the player gets back down here, that'll put a new townsperson in there. So that's good. And then we'll come back up to the friend generator, or the button rather. And we'll do a new logic connection when pressed. And the next thing I want to do is turn that radar marker down here back on. And we'll activate that. And by the way, I think I might have missed something. Yeah. So on the radar marker, we'll do a new logic connection. When the radar marker is deactivated, I want to come over and turn off this dynamic trigger that starts the quest. So if the player wanders away from that locator and comes back, I don't want to display this text again. And so because of that, our reset button will also need to turn that dynamic trigger back on. There we go. So new logic connection when pressed. We'll go back and turn on the dynamic trigger for the mission. All right, and then that changes, or that puts an end to everything down here. That'll reset everything on this end. And then we need to reset a couple of things up at the Oasis. So we'll do a new logic connection when pressed. First thing I want to do is turn off the radar marker here at the Oasis and make sure that's off. And let me see, looks like I did not. So on the radar marker here as well, we should do a new logic connection. When that is deactivated and we've ended the mission, we should come over and turn this off so we don't repeatedly end that mission. And that means our reset button will need to turn that back on as well. So new logic connection when pressed. And we should actually make sure this is off initially, because that's what the level starter does, because this initially shouldn't be on. So then starting the quest will turn it on, and then finishing the quest, turning off that radar marker up here, we'll turn that back off. So there we go. And that should be everything. So we'll come over here, and I want to make sure I'm far enough away. We'll put Jasmine down over here. Okay. Before we do that, let's go ahead and do a reset, because I want to make sure those dynamic triggers are in the correct state initially. So we'll push the button, and there we go. And now, to save a little time, I'll just go into Spark mode and zip back over here. And I'll put her up on top of this little rise so we can see the locator down there. So right now there's nothing there, but as soon as we get a little bit closer, we should see a townsperson generate, or maybe not. The slope will be in the way. That was kind of the goal, is to have that hide it a little bit. So there, now we have the townsperson there, and the radar marker is there, so that's great. And as we get closer, she says, "Will you help me?" And sure, so we'll pick her up. The radar marker down there is off, and the one on at the Oasis is on up there. You can kind of see it in the distance, even though it's not on my radar yet. But as we get closer, it should appear, and it does. And so now when we come up to the Oasis, there we go. So the end of the quest, and the townsperson standing in the water, and the radar marker is off up here. So that's the Thirsty Traveler side quest. It's a simple quest and not too difficult to build, but it gives the player something else to do in this huge toy box besides the main quest, which is rather brief. Next time I'll set up the rest of the outpost out there in the distance and the bandit camp, and I'll put the finishing touches on this toy box. Until then, I want to thank you for watching and remind you to subscribe to my channel or follow me on my blog if you haven't already done that, so you'll never miss a video. For those of you who want to build this side quest on your own console or PC, you can find a logic diagram on my blog that may help you out. That's all for me today. I'll see you next time.